Shawn Siegel's updated tiers, the tiers you need to use to win best ball championships this season. That's what we're talking about today. Is we're drafting a $125 FFPC Best Ball Tournament draft. We're looking at Shawn's big gorilla update as he shares his 23 priority targets for 2025 and the update from the earlier piece this offseason. So we will get into some of that. I also have some YouTube comments, some emails that maybe some of the players that are drafted today, we might even pop up. There was some questions about the draft that Shawn and Ben did. They did 2 main event drafts over the last week, and some questions about players over certain players. We may get to it as we work through the tiers today. But Shawn, this is the team. We didn't get the 1 spot. We didn't get the 2 spot. We got the 9. But this is the team that is going to win $300,000. We are 1 spot away from the next selection. How are you feeling, and who should we be picking?
Good, Colin. Good. We've got so much to chat with you about. We have another preseason week in the books. I am probably about 70% through that in terms of trying to figure out exactly what to make of everything and just, working through all the games, all the snaps, all the ramifications. But it's been fun to watch football, even if mostly the starters aren't playing. We are on the clock. You have Trey McBride in the queue. Trey McBride seems like the pick.
Well, Trey McBride or Malik Neighbors, they would be the 2 that I would be between here. But I have added McBride based on the positional upside.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Feels like Shawn was on board with that very, very early. I guess the first one here, we're looking at the mega tiers to give the listeners a little bit of a spoiler towards it. Ja'Marr Chase, Brock Bowers up there at the top. Very impressed, Shawn, on this. This may be something you've done in the past and I haven't noticed, but in this version, it is the mega tiers. But mega tier 1, not just like mega tier 1 and here is the part. You've split it into echelons. Is that something you've done always, or is this just a nice little wrinkle to add in?
Well, it was more fun than just describing them as mini tiers within the mega tiers. We did have a mega tier article last year in terms of the overall draft strategy for the 2025 season. That was one of my favorite pieces. I think it did work out well. You think back to how the redraft season transpired, and it was very profitable for us, in part because we did have the right guys at the right points, and that created a lot of leverage for us to do other things. Tight end in FFPC, that is the position that will allow you to accomplish some things that you can't do otherwise. And so I love getting Trey McBride up there. The reports from the joint practices this last week were that when the Cardinals tried to throw to Marvin Harrison, they struggled. When they tried to throw to Trey McBride, they dominated, that he was an uncoverable force. Everyone knows what we think about Brock Bowers, but I mean, there is a possibility here that Trey McBride is the 2026 101 in FFPC.
I love when Shawn, puts out a comment, and it could be speculation, could be hyperbole, but it also is said with such confidence that it may in fact be true. So we will see Trey McBride in that second echelon. The part that my favorite part of the entire article, Shawn, is just that the word echelon is repeated over and over again. It's hard to fit that into perfect conversation. The other word that I like that pops up sometimes, and it really only appears when I'm driving through like a tunnel in a car with my wife, because it's like an ongoing joke that I ask, what are them things on the road called? But there's not many of these in Ireland, but there's one tunnel in Dublin, and it's spaced out by chevrons. And I like the word chevron as well. Another nice word if you can fit it in. Brian Thomas goes, Shawn, 1 pick before. He was who I was hoping would make it back to us. He is a target in that second echelon, but we have lost out on Nico Collins as an option. Drake London would be the next player down then. Is that where you're looking to go?
Well, HEN still is in the mix there, and that's a much more viable way to approach it than, say, in a 2-3 type of format. HEN with the injury now, he is sliding a bit. Coach says he's going to be fine for week 1. Are you spooked by that and prefer to go wide receiver here?
No, I'm good with going to HN if you're not worried too much about the injury. I guess the part there is that you can get again, we're looking to win tournaments, and there's a chance that we take that pick and then all of a sudden it's a busted pick, but the upside of an Achane pick at that particular point, getting, if we look at even the ADP over the last like week or so, generally going at the 11 pick and Trey McBride. So a team, for example, at the 11, 10, 9, it wouldn't be all that unusual to get Achane paired with McBride if McBride would slide back a little bit, but generally pairing the two of them together is a really strong start. And everything that we thought 3 weeks ago may in fact be true with Achane versus, an injury at this point. But it is concerning because the problem is if it is a case that he's healthy for week one, but is only at, let's say, 80%, and the possibility of re-injury early in the season is a concern. So I am a little bit spooked by it, where I wouldn't really want to draft him at pick 10 or pick 11. But, it's only a 4-pick discount. But in the early rounds, those pick discounts are significant in terms of where you can get him there. If Brian Thomas had been there, I certainly would have went Thomas over it. There's a little bit of a split between him and London. The one area I was going to ask you, when we were deciding to go running back there, is when we get to the third round, the picks, it's kind of from pick 7, usually in the third round, it'd be Daniels, Hill, JSN, Kenneth Walker, Garrett Wilson, James Cook, Jalen Hurts, Breece Hall, then Henderson. It does lead into like more favorable towards the running back generally in that particular tier of the draft. That was kind of in the back of my mind is, take London there, and then, you can take Henderson, or you could take Kenneth Walker, for example. Any thoughts on that? Or maybe we lead into a more heavy running back roster than we normally do.
I think we can lean into a running back heavy roster from this spot in the draft. I also think that it does set us up to potentially take one of the early quarterbacks, which is not something that we normally do, but would be a fun way to play it. Jayden Daniels is falling to the end of that round, whereas Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen are up there at the top of 3. It doesn't necessarily track that there would that gap would exist, except for, of course, the problems that Daniels is now having in terms of getting his receivers to be out there and available to play. Colin, I love the receivers between round 5 and 11.
Yeah.
So I don't have a big problem kind of going the opposite route of what we normally do, but still ending up with a lot of those receivers before the wide receiver cliff.
Let's get into some of that then, because some of the questions are around players in that tier, and then some of the questions are around the QB. So we do see Lamar Jackson go as early as I've seen in any of the drafts I've been in, and Josh Allen, like not too far ahead of ADP, but at the 2.9 and the 2.12, usually go at the 3.12, or sorry, the 2.12 and the 3.04, but definitely getting pulled up a little higher as the weeks have gone on in this particular format. But the question that did come in on the YouTube comments was why Daniels over Josh Allen, and there was a couple of people come in then with comments around, Terry McLaurin's holding out, and Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen being more clear-cut options as a top-end quarterback. So and the other thing that got thrown in there was the sophomore slump potential. And I would like to highlight that the sophomore slump is more a thing that happens sometimes rather than a guaranteed fact that happens every single season. But thoughts on Daniels over Josh Allen, because this is something that we've talked about quite a bit over the course of the year. Not that Josh Allen's a bad pick, but the upside case for a second-year Jayden Daniels.
Yeah, one of the things that we also have to think in terms of with the sophomore slump will be an idea of where was the player coming in. A lot of the sophomore slumps are actually players who dramatically outperformed their prospect status and then sliding back to the pack a little bit, that sort of natural regression. We got that obviously from a CJ Stroud just as one example. Jayden Daniels, everything about his prospect profile suggested that what he did last year was very reasonable. The athleticism, the arm talent, the accuracy, all of those things are there. And so one of the things that could also happen is that we tend to evaluate rookies who are good as though they're completely arrived. And that once you're an arrived player, you just evaluate them as a veteran, even if they're a rookie, right? So if you look at it from that direction, it's a case of why wouldn't we give him this opportunity or to be aware of this path to take the next step. He's a better passer than any of those guys. He is the other player along with a Lamar Jackson who could have an absurd number of rushing yards. I'm not in any way predicting that there's going to be a massive touchdown drought for Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts from a rushing perspective, but it is something where they have to score those touchdowns because they're not runners in the other sense. And Jalen Hurts struggled as a passer last year, despite perhaps the best weapons in football. Josh Allen's weapons are terrible. And so when you put all of those things together, they have issues. One of the things with a Jayden Daniels versus Josh Allen is that the Bills have more or less just capitulated and said, we're not going to give him elite weapons. Is that the same thing as where the Commanders are? That's a more difficult question because they do have some depth. Colin, we're back up, and Travion Henderson did just go. What are you looking at here for the 309?
Well, I think that, I know we love, Xavier Worthy, Ted McMillan, but I do think that probably we can get one of them on the wraparound here potentially. You can disagree if you want to, but I would say it's Heller Jackson based on what is available here.
And are you comfortable with a big swing on a collapsing Dolphins squad?
I'm okay with it. We did take Tyreek Hill, in the late second round a couple of times, I think. So I'm open to just going all in that the narrative is incorrect here. But we don't do that. Was that a question to tempt me to say no, or was that a question that you wanted?
Well, you didn't seem all in on it. You seemed like you were saying, like,
I
Shawn,
didn't
if
get a
you
lot of
want to
time
do
there.
it,
I didn't get too much time
if you
to.
want to do it, we can do it. But probably we shouldn't take Tyreek Hill. And with that being the case, I was like, well, then if that's where we are, let's go get Jackson Smith and Jigba. The Seahawks played against. Okay, so Colin, I don't know how much you want
I'm
to make
amazed
of
that you
this. I
got that
do
amount
want
of
to.
words, out of the tone that I said like one
There
sentence.
was a clear tone on that one, Colin. The Kansas City Chiefs and the Buffalo Bills may have played the worst two preseason games in NFL history this past week. I do want to get a lot of your takeaways from that, and not necessarily those two games, but from week 2 as we go through here. But the Seahawks, they looked as good as you can look against a team that basically wasn't trying, and or they look good, right? That would be the other possible takeaway. We'll get to that in a moment because we are back up now. You mentioned Tetairoa McMillan. He goes with the Jackson Smith and Jigba selection. We also can go ahead and just select Worthy here. Who do you like?
In terms of where we're sitting, just to pair it back to the tiers again, you do have Worthy a couple of spots ahead of McMillan. Generally, when we've been drafting together, we've always gone Worthy over McMillan. At this particular slot in the draft, you're only going to get one of them. So I'm wondering here, are you flipping? Is it getting closer between the two of them for you?
It's close. They come into the same basic area in the
The
tiers.
one area that could give you a little bit of an intriguing thing is if we have obviously missed out in that tier of quarterback now, and if we did want to think about maybe getting a stack at the quarterback position, you might be able to do that with Young versus being able to do it with Patrick Mahomes. But that's more a strategic draft decision rather than a player decision. It is. Has the water murkied a little bit for you with the potential outcomes of the Rice news versus what we thought, let's say, a week ago versus where we are now, where could be a longer suspension, could be in the middle of the season, could be agreed before the start of the season. There's a lot of variance between the two of them. Has that impacted your thoughts on Worthy at all?
Only from the perspective that he should be more expensive, right? The thing that we've definitely learned from everything that's come out over the last week and a half is that the reason it's not already said and done is because Rice and company are fighting a huge suspension. Rashee Rice's ADP makes absolutely no sense. He's going to be suspended for longer than so. And the fact that they're fighting it probably does keep it into a range that's more like 5 or 6 games. But the reports were that the NFL wanted to suspend him almost all season. Like 10 games.
Yeah.
And you can't take him where he's going right now if he's going to be out for 10 games. And Xavier Worthy should be going at the 2-3 turn. So from that perspective, yeah, I mean, Worthy
Well,
just keeps going up.
why didn't we take Worthy in the 4th round then?
Well, it was because of the tone in round 3 that was Tyreek Hill, which got us onto JSN, which then got us on to McMillan as the week 17 bringback. You know that I'm addicted to this Seattle Carolina week 17 game. That will probably be the lowest scoring one in the entire NFL.
Yeah, a few years ago, I think was it Jets Lions? Was it Jets Lions or Lions Seahawks? There was one of them where we just kept drafting over and over, and everyone thought that like it was going to be the worst matchup of all time. The teams turned out to be much better. I think it was Lions Seahawks that it ended up being. So we now have Trey McBride, Achan, 2 wide receivers, McMillan and JSN. So we'll see how things turn up. You mentioned some of these later options that we are looking to pair into. The one that comes up all the time, Shawn, is Jerry Judy. The second one of those that gets talked about quite a bit, especially when Ben's involved, is Chris Olave. Some positive, like looking at the preseason stuff, the way that the usage of the wide receivers for the New Orleans Saints is trending is quite positive, I think, for both of those guys in terms of a lot of the frustration around Olave outside of the injury-related stuff was, incompletions on deep targets that looked like they were just slightly off between him and Derek Carr. So a couple of questions coming in. And one of them was about Jerry Judy over Ricky Pearsall. The other one was about Jerry Judy over Olave. People kind of still factoring in the fact that if you faded Jerry Judy for the majority of his career, that would have been a positive impact. So I think it really comes down to a lot of people not believing in Jerry Judy. Maybe we'll save that to when we pick Jerry Judy, Shawn. But why should people believe in Jerry Judy? And Shawn, as we record this, a short time ago, Joe Flacco now the starting QB for week 1. So surely Jerry Judy's price should only be increasing at this point.
I mean, Jerry Judy's price makes no sense. I don't even understand most of these questions. Did people watch what Jerry Judy did last year? And again, this isn't the whole thing because you can have terrible WAR numbers. Your wins above replacement can be awful because you're Jameis Winston and you're throwing all these picks. But the 3 quarterbacks who generated the most negative WAR in all of football last year were 3 guys for the Cleveland Browns. And then the next 2 worst guys were Anthony Richardson and Will Levis. He had a massive season with 3 guys who were worse than Anthony Richardson and Will Levis.
I feel like with him, it's more a case of people sticking to their priors of what they maybe had thought of him early in his career and then thinking about the quarterback situation being as poor as it looks and as it sits at the moment. But I think that the positive
I'll get into that in a second here too, but we've got to make a pick here. And we have some options like Flowers and Ridley and Waddle.
I think based on what we talked about, maybe we should go for one of those options and see if Jerry Judy wraps back around here based on ADP. Are you comfortable taking one of them and seeing who comes back?
Well, let's go ahead and take the big swing here on, or not big swing, but take the swing on Zay Flowers. Have a decent amount of Rashad Bateman, and Flower gives the other side of that in a full PPR format. He could end up having a monster season. They continue to talk about him as the one guy who is such a difference maker that they have to involve more in the offense. Now they have so many playmakers, they want to involve everyone more in their offense. You can't do all of those things simultaneously, and yet Flowers, he's such a fun floor ceiling pick from the perspective of being an elite receiver in an explosive offense. Now the explosive offense creates some structural issues for him specifically, but it also gives him plenty of upside. Colm, I don't know that we need to force the Judy pick in this draft.
No, that was more a comedic bet. But maybe he is the player that comes back to us. The player that I would be looking if we have an option here on the clock would be to take Travis Hunter. Have you a different name? Or was that where you were thinking about going?
Yeah, I think that Hunter is probably the guy.
Now, no one as we speak it into existence, Hunter will go and we will draft Jerry Judy, but he does go right around this range. The other player that was mentioned there about, can't understand taking Judy over him was Ricky Pearsall, who did just go with the 601. Do you see any
Pearsall,
way
who was not a good prospect and then didn't do anything as a rookie and then hasn't been great in camp?
I love this. I'm just going to continue on these shows to bring up YouTube comments to Shawn rather than reply to them. It's just a great way. Shawn,
I mean, that's
I
an
can see why you're no
exaggeration to an
longer
extent.
on
It was
social media.
awesome that Ricky Pearsall looked good in preseason week 2, and I did move him up after that. I think that is a good point there. But one of the things that we're looking at with Pearsall is that you do have to consider his track record to this point, which has been very, very poor. It's night and day from the track record of a Jerry Juedy. The other thing that I would mention is that, and we are going to get to make our Travis Hunter pick here.
Nice.
The other thing that I would mention is that the Cleveland Browns thing just seems so overblown. The quarterback, because all of the quarterbacks who might throw passes to Jerry Juedy this year are better than the quarterbacks last year. Joe Flacco should basically be a little bit more restrained version of Jameis Winston. Then you have Kenny Pickett, who is probably a solid-ish starter, especially with a dynamic coordinator. But one of the things that has been interesting watching the preseason, this gets back to where people started. What were your ideas coming in? A lot of people were enthusiastic about the Shedeur Sanders start, which was okay. But if he had to play half the season and they're bad and they're trying to develop him, I guess I just don't have any question that Sanders could support Jerry Judy at the level that we need. And then you come out, and it's where people started with on this. I read a variety of things about Dylan Gabriel, and you have the couple of big mistakes that he made. But Colin, he looked fantastic.
Yep.
He looked he looked better than Tua, right? And he looked exactly like the guy who lit it up for Oregon last season and had them as the best team in the country for the full season. Obviously, they didn't win the whole thing. But he looked fantastic. The ball was coming out fast. It was coming out on a line. He was hitting his guys in the chest over and over and over. It's preseason. You're playing against an opponent's, vanilla defense, not their best players. But he also is not throwing to Jerry Judy. He's not throwing to David Njoku. If you told me that Dylan Gabriel was going to play half the season, I'd also be like, that's fine. He can definitely support Jerry Judy. I actually really like their QB situation. It's going to be funny because it's going to be one where one of these guys melts down over and over. We get 4 weeks of Flacco, he's awful. 4 weeks of Pickett, he's awful. 4 weeks of Gabriel, he's awful. And then Sanders follows it up by being awful and just they have to replace everyone next year. But Colin, the Browns are going to be fun. The Browns are going to throw a lot of passes. Right before we recorded, at least in terms of when I saw it, there was news that the Browns and Judkins are having a hard time coming to an agreement.
Yep.
If that is the case, then again, you're going to have a lot of passes thrown in this offense, and they have some fun players. But the very fact that Cedric Tillman played in this preseason game, I mean, Jerry Judy is so gapped from the rest of their weapons. It'll be hard for him to fail. He's just going to run so many routes and have so many targets. So even if you don't like him, he's set up very well compared to a lot of the other receivers going in that same area.
So I'm going to set this up as a question, and then I'm going to ask you to tell us, the upside for Travis Hunter because we've drafted him ahead. I think Hunter is maybe the most upside play of the entire draft board as things are set up. But the 6th echelon, Shawn, there's no priority targets in it outside of Patrick Mahomes. Is that a case that you feel like that's an area of the draft that gets flat, or is that a case that you're pulling people up the group that maybe are going in that area of the draft? Do you find that a little bit flat? And that's really the only two. When we get down into mega tier 3 with the 7th echelon, there's a lot of guys in there that you like as potential priority targets. What happened with the 6th echelon?
So this is a group of players where you get into guys who are being drafted a little bit more on past production or name. And they're players that I am going to rank. It's not like you're leaving them off your board or you're dropping them into the hundreds, but guys like Marvin Harrison, DJ Moore, Rashee Rice, Terry McLaurin, Cortland Sutton, Mike Evans, DK Metcalf. These are players who people are not fully adjusting for what their situation is now. Either how poor last year was, new competition from teammates or dramatically decreased quarterback play. It's not exactly the same problem for every player, but it's a lack of an adjustment to where we are in 2025 versus where we were 6 months ago or a year ago. Even someone like a Marvin Harrison, it's a lack of an adjustment to what he's been in the NFL and what he's been in training camp. Now, that's not to say that someone with the track record that a Marvin Harrison has, the things that he did at Ohio State, that he couldn't turn that around, that the light bulb might not, go off. That I mean, the one thing that probably can't happen or won't happen is that Kyler Murray suddenly becomes a better passer. That's always going to be a bit of a hurdle. But even with him, right? I mean, you're competing with Trey McBride, which would be, competing with peak Travis Kelce or competing with a Rob Gronkowski. It's going to be tough to hit a really high ADP for someone who hasn't proven it yet when you have a bad quarterback. And so it's sort of a group of players who they certainly have the background to be in that range, and it wouldn't be fair, realistic. It wouldn't make sense to drop them much farther, but they're a bunch of guys who are ranked below where they're being drafted, and so we just don't have targets there.
That's fair. So we need to have a target in one pick's time. And it's interesting that some of the priority names that I'd be looking at here are actually from that next tier. Jordan Addison was one of them who would have fit this team quite nicely based on, we already had the 4 wide receivers in front. We could have kind of taken the suspension with those guys as part of the roster. The next one down is probably like Matthew Golden. Have you any names here, whether it's wide receiver or not, that you'd be interested in taking at this particular point?
I don't love this area of the draft, but I do think that Golden makes sense. I think we could also get our second tight end in here and take David Njoku.
Listen, I haven't drafted enough Golden, I don't think, as in terms of being a Packers fan. So let's take Golden and get our 5th wide receiver. Njoku, I haven't really been drafting. I know we've been drafting Fanning. We're obviously talking up Jerry Juedy. We kind of seen what Njoku was able to do at the end of last season. Do you think that the offense is mainly going to run in a similar way again, if that's the case, that it goes through both of them? Or do you just think that there's enough spike week potential with Njoku to be able to push through in some of these weeks?
Yeah, he just has so much target volume, and because his ADOT is so low, they're going to be catches, right? He probably isn't going to go on a super cold streak. The tight end premium element makes a big difference here, because if you're getting targeted, 3 and 4 yards from the line of scrimmage over and over and over, and each one of those is a 1.5 points, then you start to rack up some pretty good numbers in a hurry.
And I would kind of agree with you, because I thought that Njoku or Loveland would have got back to us there. So that was one of the reasons that I was happy to pass on tight end. I thought one of them would have come back through. Neither of them make it back, which is a little bit disappointing. So I'll take the heat on that particular one. The other player that I was going to mention was Jaylen Warren. He also went. So a pretty tough turn here at this particular spot off the draft. Shawn, hit me with who we can look to, pull up here. There's players that we like, but I don't necessarily think that we need to draft them at this point. But there's also a hugely flat area here off the overall board. Maybe Charbonnet?
Yeah. This would be... Well, I was actually going to suggest that we take Deebo Samuel and get a Samuel share, because he had fallen, and he is set up pretty nicely now for a huge number of targets. But he does go. And so we're back to staring at a board that doesn't have many interesting names. It would be an interesting spot to take a Caleb Johnson share. We could do that. The other thing that we could do would be to go ahead and grab Bo Nix after so many of the Denver Broncos receivers looked fantastic last weekend.
Yeah, we could take Nix. I'm pretty okay with that based on how flat it's gotten here, because I think some of the running back options may come back true to us. Now, that'll be disappointing if that's not the case, but I'll a little bit tough. It's the start of the quarterback window here. Patrick Mahomes just went 2 picks prior. I know I made the decision to take McMillan over Worthy. I was a little disappointed then when I got back to that golden pick, and Mahomes had still made his way beyond that. I was kind of thinking back to that McMillan decision, and then I really, the player that I wanted to come back to us there was Colson Loveland, but that obviously doesn't happen. So our tight end, we obviously have taken Trey McBride in the first round, but we're kind of into that situation, Sean, where we're kind of looking at Chigakonko and beyond to try and fill out those tight ends as we move through the rest of the draft. Let's do a review that decision by column segment here. Matthew Golden at that particular pick. Should we have went with the tight end there?
We probably should have, because if you get that second strong tight end, you're set up really nicely for your overall build. Now, there's not so much pressure to do it when you have Trey McBride up at the top, but we do know that historically 4 tight end has been so dynamic in this. And if we're going to burn 4 roster spots, we probably want several of the other players to be good. You mentioned Colson Loveland. I want to hear the bull case for him. He looked good in their evisceration of the Buffalo Bills, but we also got a vertical target to Cole Kmet right off the bat, leaving me to think that it's not the most fun way to play it, but probably still the most exploitable way to play Chicago tight ends is just to take the free Kmet at the very end of the draft.
Yeah, and I've been playing it much more through the Kmet pick, and it's kind of just more of a balance it out. But I think that the prognosis would be for as the season goes on and this bear. The one part that really has scared me off it is not like the Cole Kmet's going to get used more. I think Cole Kmet's a very good pick at his ADP. I just think that there's a chance here that, like, I know we've seen it last year where it kind of clicked a little bit more for Bryce Young as the whole way that season transpired. I just think Caleb Williams just may not work out here in the NFL at all. Seeing how things are going with the Bears overall, but that also could be wrong. That's more of my thing with the Loveland pick is I prefer him to the likes of Ingram, for example. Prefer him to like Mark Andrews. So it's more a cost, and he's at the end of that tier. Like if we look at the tight end position, you're into Dalton Kincaid, Ferguson, Goddard, Pitts. He's kind of the one out of the end of that Njoku tier that I would prefer to like get him at cost versus those names.
So let's dive into preferring him to Evan Ingram a little bit more. We have Loveland in a situation where he could be very, very good right away. That's probably more likely than not. But you referenced the concern with Caleb Williams. We don't have a ton of concern about Bo Nix right now.
No.
And for Ingram, even though the Broncos are also congested, there's just a lot less competition for Evan Ingram, and he basically already is what the upside scenario would be for Loveland, unless we're saying that Loveland is going to be, like a 12, 13, 14 touchdown guy, or we're saying that Evan Ingram is washed. Is the concern, do you have serious concerns about Ingram being done?
Oh,
Obviously, I'm not
it's not necessarily the concern of like the player, but it's the difference in the cost. Like in this draft, they went much closer together, but like Colson Loveland usually goes at the kind of middle of round 9, whereas Evan Ingram's going at the the end point of round 6. So there's usually a almost 3-round difference between them in ADP. So it's more factoring in like building out a team and having him on it versus building out a team and having Ingram on it.
It does look like the prices may get closer together. It looks like Colson Loveland has jumped recently as he's gotten healthy and maybe going in the back of 8, but that doesn't make sense. I was encouraged that we got the big play from Evan Ingram. I do think that the concerns about his after the catch potential and how he played after the catch last season are probably slightly overblown. Evan Ingram is going to be dynamic when he gets the ball in his hands, and there's the potential for lots of plays like the one that started off the Broncos game this last week, where he catches the ball and there's a lot of open space in front of him. I've had Ingram ranked fairly aggressively this whole offseason. I don't have a ton of him. He hasn't fit into most of the teams that I've tried to draft. And I think for the reasons you're talking about, even though I have him ranked ahead of ADP most of the time, it'll be interesting to see how that works. If Bo Nix is the best way to play it, if Ingram is the best way, if Harvey is the best way, if Pat Bryant or Marvin Mims or Troy Franklin are the best way. The Broncos are fascinating. I've always hated the Broncos, obviously, growing up in Kansas City. You have Denver as the arch enemy. At times, you had them as the nemesis. Colin, it's getting tough because the Broncos have turned themselves into one of the most fun teams in the entire NFL.
Yeah, well, obviously we were on the Bo Nix bandwagon. We're kind of on the RJ Harvey bandwagon. So when you're on a lot of the bandwagons of players for that roster, you're going to get excited to see how that all plays out. The Ingram conversation about how he could do after the catch, I think like there's going to be a lot of the plays that Bo Nix does are going to be some of those shorter passes, and I think that opens up that potential for yards after the catch, whether it's Ingram, whether it's Mims, how the offense can be creatively applied. I'm looking forward to seeing how they do all of that. So not necessarily, you kind of touched on it in a different way, and I might not have fully said it in the way I intended it when I was saying I'd rather him over. I was mainly talking about at the ADP and how to structure the rest of the roster. So Shawn, we have basically a hero RB with Achane, Trey McBride at elite tight end. We have Bo Nix now as a QB. Could be stacked later, but we are now at 5 wide receivers. So we'll see what we do here in these next couple of picks, because we do have some wide receivers we like. Ideally, you'll be looking at some of those Broncos that we're talking about with Ingram already off the board. But the names that we will have in the queue are a little bit different to the names of the Denver Broncos. So we have some interesting options potentially coming up here in an area where it can be a time to have a lot of fun picks. But you have added, obviously, Josh Downs, Jayden Higgins, that kind of tier of wide receiver. But I think we're going to find it tough here if we get 2 more picks and Cam Scadaboo is available here as our RB2.
He is obviously so much fun, even though the most recent reporting is that he may not be ready for the start of the season, which it sort of tracks with everything else that we have been getting on this. Colin, what do you think about grabbing a little Dallas Goedert here to play off of another elite offense before we really get into sort of a full attack on these 0 RB candidates?
So I guess my question on that is, do you want to see if we can push him around the turn, or do you want to push the running back around the turn?
So Colin is going to really want Scadaboo here. We'll go ahead and grab him. Not because he's more likely to go, he's less likely to go. But also, we don't have Dallas Goedert. We couldn't care less.
Well, that was... I will draft more tight ends, Shawn. I do like drafting tight ends. Don't worry. It's not that I'm not going to draft any tight ends the rest of the way.
So, Colin, my question for you would be, well, I mean, we really need to make that pick because your next pick needs to be either Jayden Blue or Bashal Tutin. ADP would suggest that neither of them will get back to us in round 11. Do you have a preference between those two guys?
It's interesting with the comparison between the two, and we'll see what happens. But it feels at the moment like if we're looking at trajectory for early season, that there's much more chance that Jayden Blue is somebody who makes an impact in those opening weeks. That also probably now with the conversation you're having there with Scadaboo might factor in a little bit to that. So it feels like Blue is more the early season play. It's going to be a case where I still feel like even though Tutin is the best running back in that backfield, I think they're kind of making him earn it a little bit. I think it might be week 6 or 7 before we start to see him get a larger role. I think it's much more easy for an offense to see versus the veterans that are in Dallas to go with the guy who is more athletic. So that would be the way I would lean, would be Blue over Tutin. Do you think I'm overblowing the kind of period as to where either of those guys could work their way into significant snaps?
Well, Liam Cohen allowed Bucky to make incursions into Rachaad White's work pretty early. Now, in this draft, we don't have to worry about it because he actually
It's
goes
gone.
ahead of our pick here. He goes at the 10:01. Jayden should be someone that people try and get in every single draft. He's going to be a fantasy playoff monster. But Jayden Blue is certainly not a bad consolation pick. That's probably the pick we would have made anyway.
I think it's the pick that I would have went for based again on how drafts are playing out at the moment. Blue is usually the RB39, Tootin's the RB41. There's not much difference, and at the point of the draft we'd be selecting him. It wouldn't be a case that he would make it all the way back around to the starting point off the board again. So I would go with Blue. We're one pick away and we're waiting. Sean, our fallback though could be tight end if you had it. But the other players that are Chris Godwin went. So I was kind of hoping to get two running backs through those two rounds, and Sean makes the click very quickly. Sean, we did get Dallas Goedert back through there. Was there a reason why you clicked on Blue before we had our Dallas Goedert conversation? No.
I don't know why I brought him up in the first place. We want to make sure that we're getting the full season running back build or roster, the overall team that we want to dominate the different times, the different parts of the NFL season. There's also the issue here where you're probably going to want to overdraft Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt. You are going
Somebody
to want
else will do that before us, Sean. He's it feels like at the moment, if you want to make sure you get him, you have to take him in the second round.
We also have the possibility coming back that Trevor Lawrence would be their preferred QB pick. If you don't get him to come through to you, then there's pressure to draft Bryce Young, which is fine. We already have both sides of that game set up. But it is interesting when you think about Young in best ball versus redraft. In redraft, he's absolutely free. And so from that perspective, I almost like to get my Young shares through that avenue. But again, we're perfectly fine going the other way. The point is that you're going to take a quarterback in one of the two picks in the 11, 12.
Yeah.
Once we factor that pick in, there's certainly no room to select a tight end who doesn't really move the needle.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I don't know if you said Jordan Love as well. He would potentially fit in here with either him, Lawrence, or Young. I think I'd probably, based on the conversation you had there about Young, and we've drafted him a lot, I probably would go in that the other two versions over him. Another question, Sean, when we just get into this QB conversation was around Brock Purdy. And it was, why are you out on Purdy's price this year, Sean? He said this guy said that he loves him this year based on the easy schedule, good offense, easy to stack. He thinks he should be going where Kyler's going, and he thinks he outscores Kyler by a good amount. So in this particular draft, interestingly enough, he actually goes ahead of Kyler Murray by 8 picks or so. But is it true that you're out on Purdy, or is that just that you drafted and you maybe picked somebody else? This was part of one of the recent. This was actually on a show where myself and yourself talked some dynasty over the last week.
Yeah, Purdy is fine, but I mean, Jawan Jennings was really good last season, and if we have some questions about what he's going to be able to do based on what's happened to this point, we already talked about how Pearsall is pretty unproven. They have tended to have limits to how much they employ George Kittle. Obviously, George Kittle is a star. You're going to have some passes to Christian McCaffrey that work out really well for Brock Purdy, but he's also going to carry the ball a lot. I mean, this team doesn't really look very talented until you get Brandon Aiyuk back. And there are a lot more questions about just, the coaching staff, the overall caliber of the roster after the defensive collapse last season. It seems like last year there was too much skepticism about Purdy, and now there's not enough thought going to like what is the upside and how does he fit into the overall group of quarterbacks when you have breakout candidates like Drake May and Caleb Williams? You have JJ McCarthy with far better weapons. You have Trevor Lawrence with a dynamic coordinator and better weapons. You have CJ Stroud with no running backs and better weapons. There's nothing wrong with selecting Brock Purdy. He's going to make sense for a lot of teams. But I do think that right now, the pieces in San Francisco are not particularly interesting. You mentioned it being easy to stack. I mean, that's true from the perspective of the players not being expensive, but they're not expensive for a reason.
So we are back up on the clock. Trey Benson with 1 pick before. Krusky Merritt won 3 picks before. That was in the 11th round. So we are up. We have some options. I'll let you mentioned the QB part, Shawn. So I mentioned Jordan Love. There's Trevor Lawrence. But again, I'm looking at the teams. Every other team on the turn has already one QB. May consider another push around the corner here if you're interested in that. If there's another name that you'd rather over the quarterbacks, or do you want to get a QB here?
This is the range where the teams have to take their second quarterbacks, I think. So it would probably be quarterback for me. And even though things aren't going perfectly in Jacksonville, it seems like they're going a lot better than they are in Green Bay.
They are. You want to go with Lawrence? Okay. So when we talk about some of these offensive struggles and so on early, and like obviously the problem is now that Love is going to be sitting on the sidelines for some time before the start of the season with the hand injury and the procedure that he had done. But I think the team's going to be a lot better offensively than once the season starts. I'm not too overly concerned. But the one part that I guess that if we're playing into what happened last season, he was hurt a lot. The team ran a lot. Could this now lead to a little bit more of that, protracting out over the course of the season? So I can see from that point. Again, I didn't have a player I had to have there. I'd be interested in Tyjae Spears. I know Shawn is not in the queue yet. I'm wondering if you're, concerned with that, the high ankle sprain element of it. Higgins did go 1 pick after. Jared Goff did go a pick after that. Is Spears of interest to you here, or are you a little bit holding back with the high ankle sprain?
I drafted Spears in the Apex Experts League a couple days ago. I do think if he falls to a certain point that he's a very nice pick, but he can't stay healthy. He's probably not going to get the goal line carries. Once you already have this early season injury, I just think it's really bad for him specifically, where everything that his thesis is built on is this electric agility, the fact that he's a dynamic receiver. I guess I wouldn't have him particularly close to Dylan Sampson right now.
So Shawn may have been right on the QB call. We see Jared Goff, CJ Stroud, Justin Herbert all go around that turn, the 1 pick before us. Shawn doesn't like the Green Bay Packers anymore, so we are going to pass on the Love pick here at this particular point. Shawn, Luther Burden, is that where you interested?
2 names that I would be strongly considering at this point would be Dylan Sampson and Luther Burden. Burden obviously looks fantastic. You mentioned being concerned about the offense. He's also, Olamide Zaccheaus has supposedly been fantastic and is blocking him a little bit with the. Dylan Sampson is almost.
Let's do Sampson. Sampson, I think fits. Sampson fits. Like I think there's early season work for him, which may get us past the blue and Scadaboo part of the equation and gives us the 4th running back. I think that's a really nice 3 RB and 4 pick stretch with Blue, Scadaboo, and Dylan Sampson. I think that's a nice strong run there through those particular names. Sampson is in him and Blue are both in that 8th echelon when we're down looking at the mega tiers and mega tier 3, Shawn. They're all priority options. The interesting thing there is you do have Sampson ranked above both Trey Benson and Bashal Tutin, who Tutin went 2 rounds ahead and Benson went a round ahead. So you're pretty strong on the outlook. Is that outlook anyway tied to the Judkins situation? Is it, if Judkins was going to be back for week 1, does that change much for you, or are you just on a season-long aspect for Sampson and his role?
Well, the article that you're looking at there, and we do have some updated rankings on the site, is one that came out right before the announcement that Judkins was not going to be prosecuted. Now, it does sound like he might still be suspended. It also sounds like the Browns may not be willing to pay Judkins the same amount as the slot, all of which just makes it tougher. We're into kind of a weird point where the offense is going to be built early in the season around Dylan Sampson, and the gap between these two guys as prospects may not be that great. Now, maybe it is. There were some things about Quinshon Judkins in terms of what he did early in his career and then his crazy athleticism at his size that would lead you to believe that the upside scenario is certainly that he would be one of the best running backs in the entire NFL. There is an element where with Sampson and Ford behind him, he probably doesn't score that way, but you take it back out and now it's Sampson with Ford, and the outlook for Sampson in a 2-back situation is better than what it would be for Judkins in a 3-back situation when you think through and price all the different scenarios. Again, if we're thinking about the Browns as being a competent offense, probably not a dynamic, super high scoring offense, but one that can move the ball. And I really think all these quarterbacks can move the ball. You put Sampson in that as the focal point, and we get very, conflicting reports on exactly where he is versus Ford. They haven't really shown him in the preseason. Part of that seems to be that he's been very good in practice, and you can't afford to lose another guy when you're probably going to be without your second round pick. The contingency based upside for Dylan Sampson after he just absolutely lit up the SEC last year and is going to be one of the youngest rookies out there this season is very, very high. Are there paths that could, are there hurdles or obstacles that could foreclose some of those paths? There definitely are, but into this price range, it seems like we've got a little bit of a misfit between opportunity and price.
That's all very fair. So we look at the players who've gone since. Burden, who we talked about, did go. Jordan Love went. Then Hunter Henry. If we're looking at the tight ends, we're talking a little bit tight ends. Zach Ertz, Isaiah Likely, Hunter Henry, Brenton Strange. Geno Smith did go. Cedric Tillman went. Tajay Spears went in the 4th pick of the 13th round. Shawn, I was hoping Chigga Conko was going to come back here to us. He doesn't make it back around. He goes at the 13-5. So our conversation around tight end comes a little bit more to the fore at this particular point. But I certainly was optimistic that we may have seen him sneak his way back through. But I think a little bit more buzz over the last couple of days. But usually a late 13th round pick, but going a little bit ahead of ADP. In terms of the players that we have in the queue, one of the players I'm interested in, we talked a little bit about Brock Purdy and the 49ers, and you mentioned about the offense getting better when Brandon Aiyuk comes back into it. Aiyuk is a player you have in the queue that we haven't really talked much about. Is he somebody you're considering at this upcoming pick? He gets drafted.
I think that you can draft him in redraft, and I think that you can draft him onto a hardcore 0 RB team where you are plenty covered and you're looking for an additional boost in terms of your upside for the sprint element or the 3-week individual tournament run element at the end of the season. Probably still wouldn't be my preferred pick here. Colin, we're a couple picks away from Bryce Young making it back. That would put us in position to get the quarterback for that game that we talked about. And with the 3 QBs, we would be set up very nicely to, dominate that position. Not dominate, but to be among the league leaders in that position in scoring. The next couple of guys, I don't think we have a lot of pressure to make a different pick here. We're going to be okay coming back in 14 and then 15, 16 for some of our other running back selections.
Yeah, we just make the pitch for round 14. That might be where I would start to consider a Pat Freiermuth at tight end, or do you think that's a little bit too early for a decision like that? Just thinking ahead for we take Young here, but are you
He's got
prioritizing
an ADP at the end of 15, so I
Yeah.
think that we probably would still pass there. I kind of think that it might be a Marvin Mims. You want to take Mims here to go with Bo Nix?
Okay, let's do that. Let's do that. That's fun.
So call them all of the Denver Broncos receivers looked good.
That's a fun pick, yeah.
They're each at different points in their trajectory. We may get the third-year explosion from Marvin Mims, who was a very good prospect and then underwhelmed and disappointed through a season and a half, made some huge strides in the second half of last season, and now appears to be, I don't know if you can say focal point, but the Broncos appear to see him as a crucial cog in their offense. Troy Franklin is about a year behind following that same arc. He scored in preseason week 2 and has supposedly had a very strong camp. We have a bunch of receptions and yards for Pat Bryant in that game. He supposedly has had a strong camp and was a very interesting prospect. He was one of the guys that we loaded up on in every one of our rookie drafts. This kind of goes back to why we went ahead and selected Bo Nix. And Bo Nix, unlike a Brock Purdy, is someone who is very easy and fun to stack. And I want to make sure that the Purdy comments are in context too. I don't have any problem with people who want to draft either Ricky Pearsall or Brock Purdy. I mean, those picks at price are absolutely fine.
And I guess, when we're talking back to our conversation on Evan Ingram earlier, another reason is like the secondary stacking elements for Bo Nix are much more cost effective beyond having him than it is taking Evan Ingram to try and get Bo Nix then if you were trying to do it that way. We do lose out in Bryce Young. I was going to ask you, I was interested in that particular pick, but I was also thinking, did we need to get, based on having Nix and Lawrence, do we need to get the third quarterback? Not something that we have to consider now, but in this format, I might ask you in a moment, is that something that you're trying to do? I'm quite happy here with the two QBs that we've been able to accommodate. We are back up, Shawn, and I know you did say about Pat Freiermuth being a pick at the following round, and I'm good to do that if you want, but Juwan Johnson, one of the players, just selected as well. So tight end could be a little bit more expensive here over the next round or so. Who is your non-Pat Freiermuth pitch for this particular pick?
In part because we only get one pick in every round and we have to make space for some other selections. I guess I would go ahead and take either Will Shipley or Keaton Mitchell here, and Shipley is the more expensive of the two.
Okay. Let's take Shipley. Between both of us, we're really avoiding the tight end position when the opportunity arises. We did take one in the first round, though, so that balances it out.
We'll call him my truth serum take that you helped me get together and send off to Pete for his special.
Let round tight ends.
Well, maybe or maybe not, but make sure you go ahead and check out Pete's big reveal when he does those. FFPC is so different because the tight ends are so potent, but I do think when you start with a Trey McBride and your thesis for taking him at the 109 is that he is going to distance himself from the tight end 3 pretty substantially, that you still want to get the numbers in the end, and we have targets. That's one of the reasons why we can wait, and one of the reasons why I do think that late round tight end is fun this season. I don't overstate how much you can rely on some of these later tight ends and what the realistic expectations are, but Colin, in part because the Steelers are so gross on offense, Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth are both just collapsing way below what their usage is simply going to be. I mean, you have them in the same area with guys like Mike Gesicki, Cade Otton, Elijah Arroyo, Dalton Schultz. I mean, those players are not going to be nearly as involved in their offenses.
Yeah, I haven't been drafting Jonnu at all since the trade, and I have been drafting the Freiermuth side of it. But if we look here in terms of where we are now, we're in the middle of the 14th at the 1409, and Smith is falling in this particular draft. Cade Otton's just after going. Smith continues to fall. ADP-wise, Shawn, I have him as the tight end 20 in the 12th round over the last kind of 5 or 6 days. So he has not gone off the board yet. We're down through tight end 24, but we are into the 14th round. So if it's a case that he fell beyond a Firemouth, I would be open to selecting him there as well. So interesting to see the falling of both of them. Jonnu, in any draft I have been in, has tended to still get drafted, in the ADP range. So he's slipping here by well over 20 picks at this particular point. You mentioned, Shawn, you can only draft one player in each round. So is Keaton Mitchell a priority here for us coming back around? How are you feeling about the overall roster so far? So we are now at 2 quarterbacks, 5 running backs, 6 wide receivers, 1 tight end, and we have 6 picks remaining. So we probably do want to get at least 2 more tight ends. And then I guess the question about the QBs was there, are you often looking in this format to get up to 3 quarterbacks? Or are you kind of settling at 2 based on having 2? I suppose we could say that we are in an extended window here.
So Jonnu does go at the 14-11. I was going to mention that he just was in free fall and fell through a bunch of rounds in a recent draft that Zachary Kruger and I did. So yeah, he's interesting. I think 2 quarterback or 3 quarterback plays, you want to make sure that the team that you are drafting makes sense with whatever you do at the QB position. The 3 quarterbacks are going to give you an extra path through the tournament. The 2 QBs are going to allow you to save a roster spot and potentially select an additional dynamic upside scorer. There's also the issue of opportunity cost, where when the playable QBs are really done by the time you get through round 13, unless you want to gamble on someone like a Jackson Dart, in round 13, you are still being given very intriguing options at the other positions. So it's not necessarily a matter of, well, you have the overall space on your roster to draft a 3rd QB, but where that 3rd QB to make a difference would have to go. One of the things that I wrote about a handful of years ago, because it popped up both in tactically what we were doing in drafts and was demonstrated very clearly by the roster construction explorer, was that 3 QBs in the window also worked, just like 2 QBs in the window did. But if you're taking that 3rd QB in the window, it's very different than if you were using a late pick on, say, a Giants QB or a Cleveland Browns QB. So you have to factor that into the equation as well. Colin, we're swiftly heading toward the pick here at 15:09. Keaton Mitchell, Pat Freiermuth, 2 of the names that we are considering here.
I know Mitchell's one of your guys. If I was drafting here and it was a solo draft, I'd be thinking, can I get Freiermuth and Sanders in these 2 picks? Would you prioritize that over the additional run? Oh, you can answer my question, Shawn, if you would prioritize it over the additional running back, but Keaton Mitchell got drafted 1 pick before us.
He did. And so we are left staring at Freiermuth and then potentially Sanders coming back, and then you can get that 4th tight end out of Fannin or Cole Kmet. We'll go ahead and grab Pat Freiermuth here.
Not the most exciting thing in the world, Shawn. As you can tell by, we're talking about tone earlier in the show. You can tell by Shawn's tone, not overly enthusiastic.
It works in very nicely. And if you can take them up right at the top, and then you can get 3 additional guys like a Freiermuth, a Sanders, and a Fannin, who have really 3 very different theses attached to them, 3 very different ways in which they would move through the season and offer you value. I'd like to get that spread and that balance. Cole Kmet, a player we mentioned earlier in the show, is another name that fits there, where the path through the season potentially helps you at different junctures. Colin, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I have added Pat Bryant, Jalen Royals, and Troy Franklin onto the queue as well for a final receiver. Here at running back, I think we're right back into the situation or into the range, the point in time where we want to consider a Brashad Smith. A week ago, it looked like he might get cut. He doesn't have, well, his ADP is in round 18. He made all the rest of the running backs on the Chiefs look very, very slow in preseason week 2. He did play late, but I mean, some of that is just the Chiefs playing some games and trying to make sure they keep him motivated. Jarquez Hunter, the other guy who is just going to be very, very involved and probably should find his way onto either this or one of our similar rosters. Call him round 16 here. How do you want to play it? Your gasp was when Jatavian Sanders was selected. Jatavian Sanders also did have a bad drop in preseason week 2, which, those happen. It doesn't specifically matter that it happened last week.
Yeah, didn't matter to that drafter who took him, but obviously we like him, they like him, they get him. But good, I think it makes it better that we did take Freiermuth then at the pick that we had. Shawn, I think we're in an area here where it's reach for one of those names that we've mentioned, whether it's Hunter, Pat Bryant, Brashad Smith. Hunter is the first in those by ADP, but there's not a huge difference between them. Is there one of them that you want to make sure we get here? Is it Pat Bryant to pair with Bo Nix, or is it? I see the answer. Shawn is taking Jarquez Hunter. Goodness me, Harold Fanning goes off at the next pick. Shawn, help me out with these tight ends, will you? Oh my goodness.
Maybe a Cole Kmet team. You're all set up. So looking at this column, I've mentioned the research before about trying to spread out your buys. We didn't have a week 8 buy in there. I do think that Brashad Smith is a really good pick from the perspective of having the Bo Nix build. He would be good on the other side of that column. We're not going to get to 4 tight ends in this particular draft, and that is okay.
Yeah, that was the one thing with the training. That was the thing I also like. I like getting Sanders, but he is week 14, so that would have also fitted in very well with a 3 tight end build with him and Freiermuth. We are quite heavily in on the week 8 buy. We have Jarquez Hunter, JSN, Trevor Lawrence, Travis Hunter, Trey McBride. So week 8, but we have no week 8 players in the queue, which obviously is beneficial. I do like the running back room that we're putting together here. A lot of first, second year guys paired obviously with Achane as well. We'll see what happens then with the Pat Bryant went as well. A couple of daggers coming in here, Shawn, for an area off the draft where I was happy.
You sound like you're higher on Pat Bryant than Troy Franklin.
Than Troy Franklin?
Yes.
No, I'm happy to pair these guys based on the conversation we had in terms of how it could go based on the narratives for the different names, but more so a build up of a round of targets being stolen here by other drafters.
So my dream run out from this point would be for our final 4 picks to be Brashad Smith, Cole Kmet, Jalen Royals, and Troy Franklin. I think that would leave us with the perfect build for this team. Colin, what else are you seeing as we head toward the 1709?
I'm just trying to have a look here to see if it's even possible to be able to pull that off. So Pat Bryant's usually at the 1805, so he did go around ahead. We did take Jarquez Hunter. In fairness, somebody might have wanted him. We took him ahead of ADP there by a bit, as I mentioned, reaching down as Taj Brooks goes off the board. It looks like, Shawn, that can all be put together here as we get ready to see out the end of this board. So that would be, I think structurally, that would be very good for how our final roster would fill out. There is some other backup names. Taj Brooks was one of those names, so he did go off the board. DJ Giddens would be interesting, but those 4 particular names that you mentioned would be ideal. Unfortunately, a guy who usually goes in this range, but Shawn, it might be time to turn the lights out on Marshawn Lloyd this summer. Injured again, gets himself back, gets himself active for preseason. Unfortunately, just the story of his career so far in the NFL, but he is going to miss some time here for the coming weeks. Jalen Coker, another name who, if we missed out on a Jalen Royals, could fit in there. In terms of the order of those players, Shawn, in terms of the way that we want to draft them, is the order we have in the queue the preference of the order that we would select them in? That
My
would
pick is
mean
going to be the 1804. I think that this one is Smith, and so I'm going
okay.
to go ahead and click that one.
He
Cole Kmet,
also, interestingly, was that tier of running backs that we kind of had in the queue, starting from when we took Hunter, then there was Brooks, then there was Giddens. That cleared out. He was the last one of that tier that made it back to us, which was pretty good.
I'm just looking through the full team, and this draft really coming together perfectly. I know that you like more and better tight ends, but I'm pretty fired up to make Cole Kmet our third and final tight end pick. He
Are you
will have the
ready for him
same
to go
guy.
in the next 4 picks?
No, I'm not worried. I'm not worried. Nobody likes Cole Kmet. No one thinks Cole Kmet is any good. Everyone understands that he's on a team with a lot of other guys. Mike Gesicki is still available. Colin,
He's usually
where are
the
you
tight
with?
end 36 in the 20th round, Shawn. Could he go 2 rounds ahead of ADP here?
We definitely could. Anything can happen now. Where are you with Mike Gesicki at this point in time?
I've always been a Mike Gesicki stan. All the way back to his time with the Dolphins. I don't really see he's not an exciting pick, but I also don't see the point of him like this draft. He usually goes in the 14th round. So if he got back to us here, Shawn, he would be somebody I would be open to take. The reason that I'm not drafting much Gesicki is, again, the other targets that we've talked about. I'm prioritizing them at the cost versus the other players that are going in his range of rounds. But we've seen it like last season, towards the end of the season. I believe he was in my team with Connor that made it to the FFPC final last year, and he had the huge game. If I'm correct, it was the game opposite the Marvin Mims explosion against the Broncos, where those two teams had a massive shootout. But like, the upside is there, but it kind of does take one of the wide receivers to be hurt probably for him to maximize that. But if he does go, if he had a more sustained volume, I think we'll be very, very excited. It's just never fully clicked outside of games here and there for him since he was in the NFL. But he does go before it gets back. Shawn, Jalen Royals also goes before it gets back to us. So that's our perfect run, damaged a little bit, but we can still make it work here as it lingers on around. I do think if Kmet makes it the one more pick, even though he's not the most exciting of the plays that are remaining, I think for the overall roster construction, I think that he makes sense as the selection. So Shawn makes the click.
Colin, I'm heartbroken there to lose
And then
Royals.
Coker.
He was going to be so fun opposite Bo Nix
Yeah.
for week 17.
We have Brashad Smith, so we have something there for the Chiefs, I guess. That would have been fun. The problem is again, if he makes it to that pick, if he made it to that pick, are you taking him or Kmet at that point? Royals?
I was ready for Royals. I was going to click Royals in. I wanted
Okay.
to make sure we got the game stack there with Bo Nix. Yeah, that's unfortunate. But Brashad Smith doesn't have to be the guy in the first month, right? And maybe he won't. Maybe that path is fairly foreclosed with the way that people are talking about things. And maybe he'll be cut. But Colin, one of the reasons why I don't really mind drafting Brashad Smith if he's cut is that he's going to be signed by someone else. He's going to go and play and score points because Brashad Smith is good. So you don't have to completely lock onto the Kansas City thesis, even though the Kansas City thesis is fun because their running back room is very weak. The team that grabs him will probably also have some plans for him. He's too good not to factor into this season. I mentioned this a couple times, certainly written up, that he had the same next gen production score as Devon Achane coming out of college. And obviously, Brashad Smith is also very, very fast, as we saw on his change of direction run against the Seahawks I mentioned that as sort of prelude to saying that we think about week 17 and where the Chiefs will be at that point as they try and compete with this invigorated Broncos squad. And you go back to Jarrett McKinnon and you have those comparisons of Smith to McKinnon, but also that McKinnon was one of the top scoring running backs in the fantasy football playoffs several years ago. That path to scoring points works very, very well in the FFPC. And so that's one you want to keep in mind for this contest in a way that maybe it's slightly weaker in some other formats, but a Kinnan light player would be really good for what we want to do overall, and then with this squad specifically.
So that is a fun way to finish up the Brashad Smith conversation. Disappointing, yeah, we missed out on Royals. I mentioned Coker, he goes one pick after. Ayo Manor had a kind of highlight play in the preseason for the Titans. He goes in the mid 18th round. I think he could be fun. And that's another offense I'm kind of excited to see how they start off the season. Obviously, you've mentioned Okonkwo earlier, but Cam Ward and the Titans, you mentioned the situation with Tajay Spears not being able to stay healthy, but maybe if we get him to stay healthy for part of the season, it could be quite a fun offense. Troy Franklin now kind of takes the spot of the Jalen Royals pick if we can get him to potentially sneak back to us. Terrence Ferguson, one of the reasons that I wasn't talking about him as the priority at the tight end position was the week 8 bye. We now have ourselves that we have 2 week 5 buys at tight end and Komet and Firemouth. We could have 2 week 8 buys as well if we were to take a Terrence Ferguson with Trey McBride. Benson Knott is somebody who we've talked a little bit about having that post. I don't even think you can say post hype, but post disappointing rookie season to follow. What better, Shawn? A Trey McBride pathway with Trey McBride in the first round and Benson Knott in the 20th round. It could be written in the stars. Kendry Lambert Smith has had some interesting highlight plays. Obviously, Keenan Allen signed with the Chargers may impact his early season, scoring, but has had some nice catches throughout the course of the preseason as well. So there is still late round names here that I do like, and we just need to select 2 of them over these next 2 picks. Shedeur Sanders, you talked about in the Browns QB competition, went, as well as Daniel Jones in the 19th round. Adonai Mitchell drafted, Jalen Noel. So, Shawn, I think we probably will get our pick here between Franklin, Ferguson, and some of the other names in the queue for this particular pick. Have you a preference between the 2? I think we go Franklin at this one.
Yeah, Franklin to me is someone you have to be loading up on in the final rounds of best ball.
And you
He's
did
going to be a
ask me the
vertical play.
question. You did ask me the question of, did I like Pat Bryant over Franklin? What's your at the cost with a 2 round difference between the 2 guys? Which is your preference at cost?
I think you want to take Franklin late. I think he's going to be more a vertical threat. He's going to score more touchdowns. He probably is a little bit less blocked for this season. The Bryant one is a little bit tricky because if they hadn't been able to get the extension with Cortland Sutton, then maybe he becomes the heir apparent and you're just sort of off to the races there. I mean, they've got a lot of guys. It's one of the reasons that it does make it pretty tricky in redraft, but is so much fun in best ball. Colin, we like Bo Nix. I think that Bo Nix is pretty aggressively priced, but we had a flat area in this draft and decided to go ahead and take him so they wouldn't get behind at QB. We do a few different things. I really like the way that it's played out to where we're able to get Nix. And then, I mean, again, the prices on Mims and Franklin are so favorable as you try and create that weekly upside where both of those guys could score, 3 or 4 long touchdowns on the season while also being otherwise involved in the offense.
So we are down to 1 more pick in 4 picks time, but Shawn, a 2-7-7-3 build through this point of the draft. I think that we've, there's been certain points where obviously I've been a little bit disappointed. People have heard me maybe sighing, but I think this team has huge upside and very exciting roster to build out. Obviously went heavy after the wide receiver position. the first 7 rounds with 5 through 7. But since that, we've just paired in the 2 Broncos wide receivers, but to pair that with Bo Nix to get the running backs in Scatterby Blue, Sampson, Shipley, Hunter, and Smith, along with Achan. There's a lot of potential standalone value outside of. I don't think Shipley's probably going to have a huge amount, unless it's a case again where we see the Eagles be, in those game scripts where they take Barkley out for certain situations, unless there is a Barkley injury. But it's a pretty, if we set out priority targets before the draft at the running back room, I think that's come out very, very strongly as well. And we get some sexy picks, I guess we'll say, at the tight end position at Firemouth and Komet. But I think there's going to be more points between those 2 players than I think the general fantasy community is kind of factoring in at this particular point. So we have 1 pick left to go, Shawn, but how are you feeling about the roster overall here?
I like it. We have a couple of Week 12 buys at receiver, specifically because we have taken multiple Denver Broncos. I keep going back and forth in terms of the value of that last tight end who probably won't score versus the value of a dynamic, a possession receiver like Malik Washington, who could blow up and suddenly be catching 7-8 balls a game, or the vertical weapon in Keandre Lambert-Smith, who has, as you mentioned, been fantastic in camp and then looked like an absolute star in preseason week 2.
If you're trying to pitch those 2 options, the second option sounds like the more fun version of the 2. It's kind of like the the roster construction explorer probably tells you to take the born tight end. The fun pick at this moment in time is probably the wide receivers. Which way do you want to play it?
Let's go receiver. Do you have a pick between KLS and Malik Washington?
I like what I've seen in the preseason from Lambert-Smith so far. So I'm pretty excited about that. I haven't drafted him very much. I've quite a bit of Malik Washington in those dynasty bags. So there's still getting exposure to him in a different way, even if it didn't work out. I would have liked to get up to a 4th tight end, but I think that there's enough buzz around KLS that there's where there's smoke there's fire, and I think that he's. When we're looking here at, maybe it's a week where, I know you mentioned the bye weeks in week 12 that we're going to have. We have the Broncos plus Achan, but we also are looking at a situation where, the rest of the roster is balancing that out. We have a lot of week 12s, a lot of week 8s in terms of the bye weeks, but I think there's enough there to get us through. I think I'll do a run through the roster, Shawn, but I think it's pretty exciting. It's Nix, Lawrence, QB, Achan, Scatterby, Blue, Sampson, Shipley, Hunter, Smith, at running back, and then JSN, McMillan, Flowers, Hunter, Golden, Mims, Franklin, KLS at wide receiver, McBride, Firemouth, and Cole Kmet at tight end. There's a couple of areas where it's a little bit, you could say fragile, and it could be at the QB position and the tight end. I would like to have one more at both those positions, but then that gives you the upside and the firepower at the running back position and the wide receiver. Probably, could be in a better situation with 6 running back, 7 receivers, and then an additional at the other 2 positions. But you can't have your cake and eat it, Shawn, as they say. And I think there's a lot of ways that this roster can have a very strong best ball tournament run here. Can it win it all?
I think so. I mean, this is the build that, especially for FFPC, I think you have to really like. You want to have that anchor tight end, you want to have that anchor running back, and then you have so many different options at receiver as you work through these middle rounds to be able to go 5 wide receiver then and be able to then go away from it, have that position covered in a way where you should have a lot of receiver scoring. You've set yourself up nicely at the flex position. You can still then pivot into the QBs, and you get 2 QBs in the window, both of them secondary breakout candidates, where we could be talking about Bo Nix or Trevor Lawrence, 2 of the more inviting, tantalizing, breakthrough types of offenses from a full team perspective. And then you look at the quarterback play to get both of those guys together, to have Lawrence with Travis Hunter, to have Bo Nix with a couple of these deeper players who are exciting on a weekly basis. you have that position very nicely covered. And then you move into running backs. Jayden Blue, Dylan Sampson, you probably shouldn't be able to get those guys at those prices at this time of the offseason. You have so much upside in Scattaboo, Shipley, Hunter, Smith. No burn picks in that entire first 17 round range. If I burn picks, just people who they fill the slot, they're going to score some points, but they're not like weekly spike candidates and they're not full season blow up candidates. If you don't have either path to a pick, don't make it, right? And I think that this team is so fun from that direction. Now, maybe Pat Freiermuth is a little bit more that way, but he's just undervalued overall. He needs to be the driver of that offense if it's going to have much success. Cole Kmet, someone else who an established wide receiver. Cole Kmet was the tight end 8 a couple of years ago. He now is in a dynamic offense where he will be used down the field again. The weekly shot potential for him is a lot of fun. Finish up with Franklin and Lambert Smith. You have the overall build that you want. You have the guys in the right spots in the draft. You have the names that you've been targeting. It would have been nice to have gotten Jalen Royals, so you would have had Bo Nix game stacked, separate just from having the Brashad Smith play. But we obviously discussed why that one is a lot of fun. Colin, this team doesn't have a Colt opposite Trevor Lawrence. Otherwise, this is a perfect build.
Yeah, maybe not having a Colt opposite Trevor Lawrence. If you can't have Jonathan Taylor, is maybe a perfect build as well. So we'll see. We'll know in week 17 which way that leaned. But I'm excited for this roster. Fun draft. From the back of the room, we've obviously had, as I mentioned at the start, quite a few of these in recent weeks have been at the front end. So anyone that is drafting in this contest, obviously best of luck as we close in on the season. Hugely fun format over at the FFPC. You can check out the Best Ball Tournament. There's also the Superflex format. I did a draft earlier this week. It is up on the RotoViz Fantasy Football podcast feed, one of the Superflex versions of this format. So there is some slight tweaks to the strategy for that. I did it with Kevin Safranik. You can check that over on that feed as well. My name is Colin Kelly. I'm obviously joined, as always, by Shawn Siegele. You can check out his work on rotoviz.com, as well as the mega tiers piece that we talked about at the start of the show and worked our way through during the draft. If you're signing up over at RotoViz, you can use the code RVRadio2025 at checkout to save yourself 10% off a RotoViz NFL pass. Get you access to all the content and tools throughout the NFL season up on rotoviz.com. And until we are back, have a good one.